So we are starting the agenda for today. We have two very important topics. The first one is going to be moderated by Dr. Somashekhar, and it will be on COVID-19 and cancer surgery. That will be from 7:30 to 8. And then from 8 to 8:30, Dr. Anil Anand will moderate the session on low dose radiotherapy as part of COVID treatment. So we see the expert panelists which will be shown here. So for the for both the sessions, we could ask either of them. I will just quickly go through the experts. Dr. S.V.S. Dey is a surgical oncologist from AIMS New Delhi. Dr. Sharbani Lashkar is a radiation oncologist from Tata Hospital, Mumbai. Dr. Subramanyeshwar Rao is surgical oncologist from Hyderabad. Dr. Vinita Goel is radiation oncologist from New Delhi. We have Dr. Pooja Nandwani Patel, also radiation oncologist from Ahmedabad. Dr. Avinash Saklani is surgical oncologist from Tata Hospital. And then we have Dr. Arpana Shukla, radiation oncologist from Indore. Dr. Priya Iyer is radiation oncologist from Cancer Institute Adyar in Chennai. Dr. H.S. Murthy, as Dr. Somashekhar just mentioned, is the senior most anesthesiologist at Manipal Hospital in Bangalore. We have Dr. Chandramohan, is surgical oncologist from RCC Trivandrum. We have Pritanjali Singh, who is radiation oncologist from Patna. And finally, Dr. J.D. Patel, who is a surgical oncologist from Ahmedabad. And we are inviting you on behalf of us program directors, that is Dr. Tarini Sahu, Dr. Amish Vora, and myself. Over to you, Somashekhar.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. It's an excellent topic. Most of the COVID talks revolve around the medical oncology and other part, but the impact of cancer surgery is totally different. As sir has told, my very close friends and different walks of people are the experts here. The whole purpose why we need to have this expert panel to give a message is, this is one of the paper which came from Wuhan. Not only the virus which came, this showed that if during the COVID time, if you do a surgery, if you look at the three graphs, if a patient has no cancer, then the mortality is less than 10%. Because remember, surgeries are done during pandemic time, lot of safety precaution, manpower is stretched, different rules, regulation happening, things are all stretched, healthcare workers are stretched, hospitals are overburdened. But the same patient, if he has a cancer which is early, stage 1, stage 2, non-metastatic, if you look at it, that is the yellow line, then suddenly the mortality jumped anywhere close to 15 to 20%, even if you have a successful surgery, no complication because of surgeon's knife. But the same patient, if they had received chemo and they have come back in stage 3 or an advanced or lymph node metastasis or metastatic disease, then the mortality jumped as high as 50 to 60%, which means lungs are not normal. So surgeons has to deal with the disease, then the lungs and also the virus. So that's the main purpose we want to hear. We have equal distribution of people from north, south, east, west. Before I start, I would like to ask all my panelists, since last year till now, we had 4 things: lockdown 1, lockdown 2, first wave, second wave, COVID. What was the impact of COVID on cancer surgery in your institution? Since we have only 30 minutes and a lot of message to give, I request all the panelists to be crisp and answer to the point, and a lot of other points we can cover. I'll start with Dr. Dev. So you are in an AIMS, large volume of cancer surgery are done. You also got converted to half COVID, then full COVID and come back. What was the impact in nutshell in your institution to cancer surgery because of COVID, Dr. Dev?
Yeah, so we actually had an audit. We do regular audit of our data. During the first wave, the impact was, I think, on the OPDs, almost 70% impact during the peak period of the pandemic. That was for 2 months, May and June. Cancer surgery, it has affected almost 50% impact on the total volume. For 2 months, we were almost going slow or nil, and we started resumptions after 2 months of the peak of pandemic. So we could reach around 70-80% of our volume. And by the time we were hit by the second wave in Delhi. So in the second wave was very dramatic and very drastic compared to the first wave. And there was a total disruption in the month of April. You must have seen in news what happened in Delhi. So we again could resume our services, surgical services. So there was a total impact of 100% in April, and we could resume by 50% by May. So
Okay,
we are,
I would, Dave, I would ask all the question in two
Sure.
terms. Number one,
Sure.
70% disruption of the regular plus morbidity, mortality, did it change of the patients you operated? So we can take in these two. First point
No.
is very clear, 2/3 to
Yeah,
90% there was a, so
Yeah.
did the morbidity, mortality outcome changed?
Absolutely. We did an audit, but there was no significant increased mortality or morbidity. COVID positive versus COVID negative, we did the audit. COVID positive, our experience is limited. We, I think, must have operated around 20, 25 patients, mostly emergencies of COVID. And non-COVID who were operated, we compared with the last year data, 2019. There is no significant increase in morbidity or mortality in our region.
Fantastic, fantastic. Dr. Subramanian Rao, you had one of the largest cancer center outside the Tata in private sector, and I know you never stopped. You always told if COVID is going to come, let it come, but I'm not going to stop because a lot of cancer needy patients. So how do you analyze these two questions, sir? One is accessibility of service to patient cancer surgery versus the outcomes.
See, during the first lockdown, although we were geared up and I was in the institute 8 to 6 every day, the patients could not come because of lockdown. So there was at least a 50% drop. Some days there were no procedures at all. So as the patients came in, we continued to operate. Surprisingly, unlike most other places, the second wave did not really make it too much of a difference to the volumes. First wave was very low. Sometimes it went down to 10% of our volumes.
Maybe I think first wave fear psychosis played, second wave
Correct.
negligence and relaxation from people.
We got used to it. You got to used to the fear. So what happens every day, you get used to it.
Fantastic. Outcome,
mortality wise,
outcome, sir. Outcome,
I've never lost a esophagus in the past 4 years. But after COVID, patients being COVID positive, we lost one patient. We never lost a hemicolectomy in the past few years. We lost a hemicolectomy patient also. And morbidity wise, patients who had COVID, who were operated 3 weeks later also had a much longer post-operative stay.
Also, one more issue is compared to last year, this January, do you notice the same patients coming with an advanced stage and stage migration because they sat in the home? Did you notice anything like that?
Very high numbers. It's not a small number at all.
So we had 3 impact. And Chandramohan, RCC Trivandrum, biggest cancer center there. So 3 points: disruption of service for cancer surgery, outcome morbidity mortality. Third, was there a stage migration? In nutshell.
Yeah. Number one, I think Kerala is slightly different. Like Victor. Number one, we never had the impact like you guys did. We more or less stayed on to 50 to 60, 70% work throughout the COVID era. Well, let it be the first one, let it be the second one. And second one, we never had any significant increase in morbidity because we rarely came across a patient who, in fact, if I remember correctly, there are only 2 patients who are turned COVID positive during after surgery. And I think rather than going from institute to institute, you should be looking at the beautiful study which is published in Lancet Oncology. So
I'm going to put it next.
Yeah, so much knowing about
real world scenario in India.
Yeah, so we are not. I think we are least affected, and we never supposed to treat COVID patients. Hardly 2 or 3 patients post-op got COVID, and none of them died.
Superb. Saklani, Tata, I know that even during first phase you didn't stop. You had a luxury of one building, admitting them, keeping them quarantined for 7, then operating, free food, free lunch, all doctors ready to operate. So how would you gauge for 3 questions? Disruption of service, long waiting list because of COVID. Number 2, outcomes, morbidity, mortality. Number 4, stage migration.
I think disruption of service was more in the first wave because we had to divide the beds into screening and things like that. Intensive care beds were less, blood was not available. But then the hospital took up the right steps. So we had to curtail surgery. We didn't operate on ASA 3 patients. We didn't do HIPEC. Robotic staff was less as well. But we managed, I think after the first 6 weeks or so, I think colorectal was working well. So we operated about 900 cases in that year. So that was pretty okay. I think because we were very selective, the morbidity and mortality was not that bad actually in elective patients. But we did a lot of covering stomas. We didn't take any risk, a lot of Hartmann's. So that way, I think we cut down on morbidity and mortality.
So you
with regards to
little extra cautious steps, thinking we don't know where we end up at that.
That's right. That's right. I think it is better to be on the safe side. We saw this data compared to the previous year, and we saw the number of extended resections we did was double that we did on last year, because more were coming with extended locally advanced disease there.
So that would give an indirect indication patient really sat until it progressed.
That's right. That's right. I think in the second wave, we were not too bad. So with regards to MIS surgery, I think we carried on. We did more than 350 MIS surgeries, I think, because of we did all this guidelines were made because of this and that. So otherwise, for the second wave, I think we carried on as usual. I think most important thing in the second wave, transport was not affected. So patients could still keep on coming. So that was more streamlined. I think that's about it.
Superb. So if you look north, south, east, west, Chandramohan and Subbu sir had fairly a good run. My institution was not so rosy. The main reason was in the initial first phase, RT-PCR was not well developed. It was not accessible so easily. Report used to take 3 days. So a lot of patients we thought COVID negative admit and then used to turn out in the post-operative phase. Triaging was not easy for us. And we had a tough time during that time. And I still remember robotic radical prostatectomy. 5th day patient became COVID positive, and otherwise robotic radical patient just walks off. And he developed COVID lung and died. That is one of the patients we lost in first time who turned out COVID positive, even though he was screened. But anyhow, second time we learned by the time, you had Abbott test and you have gene expert, things changed. Now what Chandramohan told, why this issue, why we surgeons had gathered with anesthetists. This is one of the landmark trial, which was a global COVID surge network. 122 countries, 1,677 center, 14,200,000, 142815. Even our center was invited to upload. So which means it is true pan world. See number of cases recruited from India quite high. So this looked at surgeries done during the COVID pandemic. And if you can look at it, the 30-day operative mortality and complication was quite high. In some groups, it was like, 30-day primary outcome was as high as 30%. The most important is the complications are not surgical. In a patient who is undergoing non-pulmonary surgeries, pulmonary complication was as high as 51%, and 30-day mortality in some institution was as high as 38%, which means lungs was not well. So this is published in Lancet. Mortality, pulmonary complication in a patient, COVID surge. This is something which came. The final pulmonary complication were 38%, and it accounted to 81% of death that died during surgery, during COVID surgery. And remember, all are not cancer. If you add cancer specific, it is supposed to be high. That is what the other Wuhan study showed. So in fact, this post-operative pulmonary complication in half of the patient causing 81% mortality brought the guideline that probably during pandemic, you must be extremely careful as per the COVID surge study. And please reduce elective surgery. Cancer is a semi-emergency. Post-operative complications are very high, and you follow the guidelines and outcome which comes wherever it is possible. A proper elective surgery pathway should be given as per this. So, I think from what I can make out, my center, we have done over 100, 150 COVID positive patient surgery. From what I know, Dev and, Chandramohan has a less number. Now I'll come back to Avnish and Subbu sir. If you take only COVID positive patient, did you happen to do emergency surgeries in COVID, and was mortality different in those during those 17 days?
No, sir. We didn't do. We didn't have a need to do. Unscreened patients we did, yes.
So proved COVID like perforation, bleeding, obstruction, such. Avnish?
No. Yeah. I think a lot of obstruction, the near obstructed colons we did in emergency, even they were COVID positive, because the risk of waiting 3 weeks for them was high. And we know once they go to intensive care in a bad state, they were bad. So we were operating there. We had a few chest complications, and those who came in bad state didn't do well. But those who were done before they went into bad state, they were okay. But those who came with perforation and things like that, then it was difficult to salvage them. I think probably the family understood as well. But if you took them before they turned bad, then it was okay.
Good. Dev? Unmute.
So we had around 30 patients COVID positive for emergencies operated. We lost around 6 patients out of this, mostly due to pulmonary complications. They are all head and neck emergencies for airways, GI emergencies for obstruction, bleeding, or perforation.
You know, one thing which I say is last year we did, about roughly 800 patients. Of them, about 110 were positive, except that one prostate patient we never lost. But this year, I'm finding totally different. You know, it is not only based on whether patient had a moderate COVID and recovered or not. Like I did other day, a high-PEC patient, and 7 days back, I did one pediatric patient lung lobectomy. Somehow in this wave, within that first 30 days of COVID, the lung and morbidity is quite high. Did any of you notice this? May not be mortality, but in this variant of virus this year, somehow, if not mortality, but recovery and pulmonary problems are quite delayed I noticed this year. Dev, please go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, if they are positive, proven positive, if they are semi-elective or elective, we are asking them to wait, especially if there is history of admission to ICU with a documented fall in oxygen or a CT scan changes showing more than 50%. We are going slow on these patients. If they have a mild COVID, the outcomes are different. But if they have moderate to severe going to ICU, then we are delaying wherever it is feasible.
Okay, was second wave recovery different than first wave?
We have just actually resumed after second wave. It's only 3 weeks now. It's too early to comment on the, I think, outcomes right now. Yeah.
I think hospital-acquired pneumonia is very high this time. So actually, patients are staying for at least 3 weeks in intensive care, even if you've done some reversal of Hartmann's and things. They may not be even COVID positive, but that is there. I don't know what others feel.
I agree. I noticed the same. Now, the next dilemma we all had is allocating of our resources, decision making, balancing cancer surgery versus elective, semi-emergency, emergency, where neoadjuvant can be used, and how to do the optimum. Dr. Dev, how do you recommend during this time now? You know, cancer surgery we can't stop. When will you postpone? COVID is never going to stop. It is not that you postpone for a month. So which means you need to do a continuum of care in cancer surgery. How would you triage and these patients and what safety protocol you use? We can keep it crisp. So I'll ask all of you, how currently now with all the experience, 1.5 years, how do you recommend to triage a cancer surgery in COVID time and minimum safety protocol?
Yeah, cancer triaging, actually, we have published guidelines in Indian Journal of Surgical Oncology. It's very clear. Based on the biology, the stage, benefit of surgery, risk of surgery, and availability of non-surgical options. So based on this criteria, we divide these patients into category 1, P1, P2, P3, priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. Priority 1 is the patients where there is no other option to treat the patient and surgery is going to benefit the patient. And delay of surgery is going to impact the prognosis. So this is the group you need to identify. So all our waiting list patients, we have actually retriaged. Now our waiting list is based on the criteria based on the.
That's excellent. You know, that's excellent. I read
so
that
that's
paper.
what we are following. Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
Good. And Saklani, how do you do triaging and safety now? Because high volume and you need to continuum care. Maharashtra was hit very badly by COVID.
I know. I think for these ones, I think all those because everything is set up now, COVID tested, everything is done. So if intensive care is going to be a bit long, like if you're going to do high volume PMP, then you'll try to avoid it, pushing it for 3 days or so. But rest of the ones, but we also have to realize people are not going to wait long in COVID time. So all those ones, those who come, you have to operate on them in a week or so, as long as they are okay. You can postpone stomach closures and things like that. But in the second wave, I thought keeping people waiting less and just putting them on the list, I think that was an easier way. We did the same thing like Dr. Dev in the first wave. But this time, I think we are trying to operate quickly without having an intensive care.
Super. Chandramohan, in RCC Trivandrum, what is the triage mechanism you're using now? Because Bangalore and Kerala, same equal, you know, I keep seeing every day 50,000 new case every day. Bangalore and Kerala went together. So what triaging you used?
Yeah, I think it was slightly less in Kerala than Bangalore. But what we used to do, that definitely have two issues. Not the number of patients turning positive. Our issue was the oxygen supply was not there for a while. We didn't get, instead of 80 units, we got only 20 units of cylinders of oxygen a day. That was an issue that day. The pediatrics got cancelled. So if a patient is coming to us, the first thing we are going to ask is there any surgical alternative possible for this patient? Any other option other than surgery? So if definitely yes, we'll send for that thing. And second option is, okay, this patient need to undergo surgery, whether the patient can wait for some time, whether we can give one cycle of chemotherapy or do something and postpone the surgery if we don't have resources. The resources are mainly two issues. One issue is the availability of oxygen and ICU beds. And second issue is the staff strength. Many times we have a number of patients.
Yeah, a lot of staff they themselves became positive.
Yeah, most of the staffs are suddenly disappearing and we don't have manpower. So we have to look into our resources, look into the urgency of surgery, and look into the staff strength also. Then we, if these two options are not available, we can't delay surgery. We have to do surgery, and then we are forced to do surgery with taking all precautions once the patient is coordinated.
Nice, Subbu sir. Now forget the last year. Now a patient finishes all the workup in Baswatarakam Indo-American. Now you have 100 patients in front of you ready to ask for a date. What triaging mechanism you are using currently now? Subbu sir?
So you'll have to unmute your mic, sir.
Yeah. We looked at only two things, Som. The magnitude of surgery, like Avanish has already said.
Yes.
Esophageectomy, for example, cytoreductions, HIPEC, procedures like this, which are both harsh on the patient and on the critical care team. These things we found, and whenever there is an alternative treatment, a neoadjuvant therapy, those patients we avoided because there was a different challenge this time. In the second wave, we had a different challenge because ours is an exclusive cancer hospital. There was no pressure by the government or the public to open COVID beds for the general public. Last wave, we only took care of cancer patients and our own employees. Cancer care providers, cancer employees were the only patients, COVID patients in our hospital. So we needed only 30-35 beds. But this time we had to actually expand this to 90 beds because there was pressure by the government and pressure by the public also. People known to us, people known to our trust board, the chairman, and things like that. So and there
also
were
social responsibility. When we see people patient dying of no bed, you would feel uncomfortable to open.
So to support the critical care, the anesthesia team, 50% of it had to be shifted there. So this became a major challenge. So we had to stop a lot of procedures. Yes.
Thank you. So now the next question is, now everything is set into motion. Because last year we didn't know what to do, what not to do, abort test to do, RT-PCR to do, HRCT. Now to work up for periodic. Dr. Murthy, now that, I remember last year how we wrote the protocol for all the association to do RT-PCR or then to do antibody, HRCT to do or not, should we do CNAT, should we do gene expert? Now, what do you think is the optimal safe way to screen a patient before doing? Because we have all the modality, antibody, IgG, IgM, then we have gene expert, then we have COVID abort CNAT, conventional swab RT-PCR, and then we also have HRCT. Now, what do you think is the optimal way to screen a patient before an elective surgery who is otherwise asymptomatic, non-suspected for COVID?
Good evening, everybody. What we would, the ideal thing in this way would be to do, if it's an emergency surgery or an urgent surgery, abort test would be ideal. If not, otherwise we can do the RT-PCR. And in patients who may require post-operative ventilation or ICU stay, we want to have HRCT also to be done. And we usually take a pulmonologist opinion also before and only.
Yeah, because abort test is CNAT, comes in 20 minutes. Its sensitivity specificity is much better than RT-PCR, but it's very important to understand conventional RT-PCR has got two swabs, deep nose and deep throat. And COVID abort is only one. So it's very important to understand, even though test is high quality, swab collection is not high quality. So it's very important to do, but it gives in 20 minutes. And RAT, I'm sure everybody has almost abandoned, because rapid antigen is as pathetic as 30 to 50%. And everybody agree with me? Every institution has abandoned RAT for screening.
Yeah, we are not using RAT.
So
Yes.
same with all my panelists.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay. Now this is the issue. You know, I will tell you MIS. Everybody is an MIS surgeon in this. I know that. So I'm going to now put it. Is MIS safe during COVID? What did you do? Why? I will tell you for the other people who are not surgeon in the panel. The SAGES, the International Society and Endoscopy, it did a flip-flop. Initially, it told that in the last year, Jan, February, oh, it is a aerosol surgery, gas, pneumo, and it brought an alert until further safety of minimal access surgery is proved, because pneumo, peritoneum and gas is used, please stop it. Then suddenly they understood that probably this is the most safe surgery because it is a contained environment. So then they immediately changed this particular area, because aerosol is there very high. Then, you know, Minimal Access Academy of India and Indian Association of Surgical Oncology actually brought up this guideline that how safe it is. And I was honored that I was one of them with Subbu sir to bring this. And we published this adaptation and safety publication. We also published the SAGES. Then the SAGES adapted our paper, which we authored, you know, 2020 August issue, the SAGES officially actually adapted our recommendation, and the SAGES published this. And we postulated something called as rule of 20. 20 air change in the OT, 20 minutes before intubation, surgeon goes out. After extubation, 20 minutes he'll come. Switch off the AC 20 minutes before, switch off the AC 20 minutes after. Then 20 minutes as a surgeon, anesthetic nurse go out. 20 degrees Celsius temperature in the AC. So we brought this rule of 20, called as rule of 20 for minimal access in 2020 pandemic. Now I want to hear, Saklani, did you really stop robotic and minimal access?
Just a reminder, 5 minutes left. So
Yes,
Okay. I think robotic we had stopped because there was no staff, but I think over 1 year we operated more than 400 MIS colorectal procedures. I think we used all the things the recommendation we use. We use air seal.
In fact, we learned MIS and ERAS is the best way to handle during this time. Subbu sir, did you stop MIS? Did you have apprehension? You continue to stop?
Somehow, while we were discussing, I always had a feeling that MIS is safe. There was no evidence for that, but I always thought MIS is safe, and we took all the precautions that you actually talked about, and you really worked extensively on this. Really appreciate that.
And Chandra Mohan?
Actually, during the initial first wave, we were not sure for a while. Then we purchased that smoke suction irrigator and everything like that. But since we found out that there is no harm, then we started doing. During second wave, we never stopped.
Superb. Dev, rule of 20. Did you really change your OT? Because OT congenitally actually are positive pressure to prevent infection. COVID recommended negative suction, 20 air change, all that. Did you really do in AIIMS? Did government allow the infrastructure there?
No, we only did the air change modifications and temperature regulation and filters. So these are the three things we monitored throughout. Remaining, we kept the same, more or less.
Because in entire Manipal, we had only 2 OT which were, negative suction. All are positive and impossible to do that. And this was what MIS, which we did during last year till now, 214 robotics. And we had 12% of the patient MIS who were positive, 88 negative. None of the patients we lost. Does everybody use smoke evacuator? I know Subbu sir has a lot of them. Avnish has. Dev and Chandra Mohan, did you switch over to the smoke evacuator because of the fear which recommended, SAGES recommended at that time?
We started using it, then stopped it.
We purchased 2 of them in the disguise of COVID. I got it. But was it mandatory? Does all the panelists believe it's mandatory? 22 lakh rupees?
I don't think so now, man. I think I stopped using it now.
We had that actually before COVID.
I have next 2 to 3 minutes I need to end. We need to give this message. If a patient COVID is become COVID positive, now he has recovered. I had to post for elective surgery. Murthy, what is the right time to post for cancer? Remember, keep in mind cancer. I can't wait 3 months. COVID surge recommended 3 months. A cancer patient, COVID, recovered, normal. What do you think is the safe time for us to post this surgery? Elective. Dr. Murthy, unmute.
If the patient is asymptomatic, we can post in 4 weeks. And if the patient is symptomatic but doesn't need hospitalization, 6 weeks. And if the patient is symptomatic and requires hospitalization, having diabetes mellitus and sort of immunocompromised, 8 to 10 weeks. And if the patient is really sick and then requires ICU care, 12 weeks is the time.
Super, very nicely told. You summarized the standard recommendation. I would draw everybody's attention to this COVID surge. Beautiful way. Look at it. Elective surgery. If you post in within 2 weeks of COVID, pulmonary complication 18.5%, mortality 7%. If you post at 4 weeks, 11.7% pulmonary complication, mortality 3.4%. If you post after 4 weeks, 0% pulmonary complication, mortality 0. Beautiful statistics among 14 lakh patients. So which means 4 weeks is safe. However, between 2 to 4, definitely not less than 2 weeks. Preferably after 2 to 4, you go by the merit. This is a beautiful message I'm going to put here. I'm not going to go behind this particular area, which I want to put it. Now, last 2 questions in 1 minute, we end it. Vaccination. All my surgery patient ask me, sir, before my cancer surgery, should I get Covaxin vaccine and come or not? Do you recommend? No. Taklani, vaccine before surgery, cancer surgery.
Yes. I think normally I would say 1 week before surgery should be okay.
Super. Chandra Mohan?
Yeah, since it is not available, we are addressing it. Otherwise, 2 weeks before surgery.
There are a lot of paper. There are a lot of guidelines which came, vaccine and cancer surgery before. What do you recommend? What is the evidence?
Yeah, looking at the current situation, we are not linking cancer surgery with vaccination.
Absolutely. Same.
Absolutely.
Same with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we are not linking, and I will tell you, there is a paper, they say, if 14 days before planned cancer surgery, 1 dose of vaccine is done, post-operative pulmonary morbidity and mortality was very low. So, I read about it, but sometimes we don't have luxury of 14 days. So that's the way. So the last question, how do we look for third wave now? We know all third wave, they say they come. The reason is, this is a paper from Japan and South Africa. Cancer surgery done in first wave, less mortality, less pulmonary. Second wave, more pulmonary complication, more mortality. Same thing also came from Italy 2021. Second wave, surgery, cancer, mortality more. So how are we looking at in third wave for us to do? So any modification you have in plain suggestion to all the people? Third wave, any modification you have in mind?
So I think basically our policies will more or less remain same, but we are more wiser now, and we are more bold, and we are more used to operating with this new normal. So I think we continue doing, and we learn while operating. So it is too early to I think draw major conclusions.
Third wave, how we start preparing?
Yes.
I think just like the second wave, I think almost all of us are almost prepared. Outreach is rare. So I think Maharashtra is geared up now.
4-5 slide रखो. मैं आपसे कहूँगा next slide.
Vaccine would be done. Chandra Mohan and Subbu sir, you agree? Probably you encourage patient to finish vaccine by that time. Patient.
Yes, correct.
Thank you very much. I have to end. In conclusion, minimal access surgery is not contraindicated. Remember what Charles Darwin told. It is not the bravest, strongest, richest patient and human who survive, who adapt. We as a surgeon, patients, cancer center, cancer surgery has to adapt and grow to achieve optimal outcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Dr. Soma, thanks very much. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
We now move on to the second part of the program for today, and that is low-dose radiotherapy for treatment of COVID. And for that, we have our moderator, Dr. Anil Kumar Anand, and his panelists are Dr. Vinita Goel, Dr. Sarbani Ghosh Laskar, Dr. Pooja Nandwani Patel, Dr. Priya Iyer, Dr. Arpana Shukla, and Dr. Pritanjali Singh. Over to you, Dr. Anil.
Dr. Anil, you'll have to unmute your mic, sir.
Thank you very much, all. Can you hear me now?
Yes. We can hear you now.
Yeah. So our topic, which we are going to discuss, is unexplored waters. Not many people know that radiation can be used to treat COVID pneumonia. However, most of the people will think that radiation can worsen pneumonia, COVID pneumonia. So, so this topic is very interesting, and there was a meeting about, I could say 2-3 weeks back, which was very heavily attended by people, more than 100 participants, and I think this is a good topic to discuss. So, low dose radiation, by definition, it is any dose which is less than 1 gray. So if I have to tell my surgical medical oncology colleagues, then we normally deliver say 2 gray per day, and we deliver about 60 to 70 gray. But when we talk of low dose radiation, the dose is less than 100 centigrade. It means less than 1 gray. So what this low dose radiation can do, that is what we are going to talk. And before I talk, I will request Vinita Goyal, who presented those slides. I have requested her to present those 4-5 slides, and then we will go on with the discussion. Vinita, are you ready? Can you speak?
Yeah, sure. Please give me rights to share screen.
Please go ahead. You can share screen.
Okay, just give me a minute. Good evening, everyone. I am going to briefly share what is the rationale of using low-dose radiation therapy for COVID-19 infection. And I admit that I have no practical experience of having ever used it. But we all understand that COVID infection came as a big tsunami surge, and there are several challenges because we do not have a very effective treatment available. And the guidelines also keep changing, and there are conflicting recommendations. Now, as Dr. Anand rightly said, that low-dose radiation therapy refers to a single fraction, a single dose of 0.3 to 1.5 gray given for any purpose. And use of radiation therapy, lung radiation therapy for pneumonias actually dates back to 1900s. It actually dates back in the pre-antibiotic era, where radiation therapy was used for a lot of wide range of inflammatory and infectious conditions like gas gangrene, carbuncle, sinusitis, arthritis, inner ear infections, etc. And recently, in 2013, there was this interesting paper which compiled all this data and looked at the role of radiation therapy in the pneumonias. Now, these were the papers, these were the various publications which this 2013 publication compiled. Overall, it included 863 patients who were treated for some kind of pneumonia using low-dose radiation therapy. And if you look at the cases cured, it was 717. So prior to availability of antibiotics, there is some evidence that low-dose single fraction of radiation therapy was used for the treatment of pneumonias. Although I agree that this is a very low level of evidence because there was no control arm. These are only case series. But it still makes me wonder, as a radiation and oncologist, that, what must have been the status of radiation therapy back in 1900s? Maybe it was something like the status of monoclonal antibodies and immunotherapy in today's time for any problem where we do not have solutions. For example, even in GBM, recurrent GBM, you do not know what to do. You've exhausted use of temozolomide and Avastin. You say, okay, let me try immunotherapy. So maybe in a similar fashion, radiation therapy also enjoyed a similar kind of status till few decades back. So I think there is no harm in re-looking at the role of low-dose radiation therapy, especially in this difficult scenario. So the mechanism of action which has been proposed for the use of by which low-dose radiation therapy probably works is that we know that SARS-CoV-19 infection leads to activation of body's immune system, and it leads to production of a lot of pro-inflammatory cytokines and chemokines. They enter circulation and then they cause damage to the lung. Radiation therapy, on the other hand, has an anti-inflammatory action by suppressing a lot of these cytokines and chemokines and hence act as an anti-inflammatory action. So here, actually, I want to compare radiation therapy to antipyretics. So antipyretics work irrespective of the cause of infection. They do not eliminate the cause of fever, but they give symptomatic relief. Similarly, low-dose radiation therapy works for all kinds of pneumonias. It is not bactericidal, it is not viricidal, but it has an anti-inflammatory action. And we know that COVID pneumonia can produce a very bad damage to the lung by causing a lot of inflammatory reaction in the lungs. So that is how probably it works. But as a radiation oncologist also, if I have to practice LDRT, I have a lot of concerns, which I think Dr. Anand is going to discuss, which is about evidence, right patient, right time, right dose, side effects, etc. So I think with this, I hand over back to Dr. Anand to have a further discussion.
Thank you, Vinita, for these introductory slides, very nicely put. So now I think we will now go to our panelists. And so first I will like to ask Dr. Sarbani Laskar. What is your impression? Did you use this low dose radiation at Tata Memorial? When the first wave came, we were all shocked. We didn't know that, low dose radiation. We had just heard 1 or 2 articles came in Green Journal by McKenzie and others, and saying that, low dose radiation works. So we also had a small discussion in the department, but actually we chickened out. We thought it's very difficult to bring a COVID positive patient all the way from maybe from the ICU or the step down ICU all the way down to the radiation room, even at the end of the day-to-day radiation at about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. And then some kind of rumor spreads that COVID patient comes to the radiation oncology department, and somehow we actually refused. Our management was asking us whether you want to do it, and we said no, we will not do it because evidence is not that great. So Dr. Sarbani, did you have a thought of using it in Tata Memorial when the this cases surged of COVID pneumonia and or other COVID infection?
Good evening, and I would say that, when you were speaking all this, I kind of just, I was reminded of all the discussions that we also had in the department, because we thought it would work, not that we were not convinced about its mechanism of action. At least in theory, it seemed like something that would work. But our biggest problem and things that put us off were the logistic issues of getting the patient down from the ward to the radiotherapy treatment area. As it is during the first wave, I think most of the radiotherapy technologists and all were very scared. It was difficult to even make them work on routine patients. So at that time, getting a COVID positive patient for treatment seemed like something that could not be done. And though we did consider it, because even here our core group said, why don't you try it? It's going to be something cheap. It's going to be something that may be effective, and there is nothing to lose. But we put it off just simply because of the logistic issues involved and because of the panic and the fear that people had at that time.
Okay, Dr. Patel was more courageous than us, and she's from, Pritanjali Singh, Pritanjali Singh from Patna. And we all also know that there was a study which was done at AIIMS also, and they I think treated 7 or 8 patients with encouraging, I would say, good results. And Dr. Pritanjali Singh, can you tell us why did you consider doing this, and what was your experience?
So as Dr. Sarbani has very rightly said, that initially when we thought of this study, it was very difficult for us to contemplate how we would go ahead. But during the ethics part, my task was a little made easy by the already ongoing clinical trial in AIIMS Delhi. So that really helped us to get the ethics approval done. And ours was a dedicated COVID hospital last year from July to October. So we were all working with COVID patients. So there, actually what happened is that my technologists and every one of us were already working with COVID patients. So we didn't have that much of fear in our mind when we took up this study. And
so just describe, can I interrupt because time is short, so we want to get maximum out of you people. So just describe a little bit the process of carrying the patient from the ward down to the LINAC, how much time it took and what kind of preparations you have to make. We all know that it is a single fraction treatment, but just tell us the process.
Yes, sir. So when we select a patient and he is screened for COVID, for low dose RT, then we actually bring the patient in after all the treatment for all the rest of the patients are over, and we have completed treatment. There are dedicated corridors and dedicated lifts for COVID patients to be taken in and out. And we have selected our staff for that day. So we select that 2 technologists will be there, 1 physicist will be there, SR will be sitting already in one in the controlling room. One will be posted, 1 GR will be posted already in the CT sim, because we are actually bringing the patients down. We are doing a CT sim with immobilization, carrying out the planning, and then treating the patient on the machine under, of course, monitor guidance. And there is also basically a dedicated ICU person over there, so that because these patients are sick and ill and they have oxygen support. And then after treatment, which this whole thing actually takes about 30 to 35 minutes, bringing the patient down, CT sim, treating the patient and taking the patient back. And
thank you very much. I need to interrupt again. So now, for the benefit of audience, we all know that there is a stage when radiation, low dose radiation will work. And this is before the patient becomes critically sick. There is a small window where the oxygen requirement is increasing, maybe people say up to 6 liters per minute, and patient is not responding to steroid, because we all know steroid is a very effective treatment for patients who are heading for a cytokine storm or patient heading for a acute COVID pneumonia. So before they get very sick and they need ventilatory support, that is the window where low dose radiation works. And we as radiation oncologists have a heavy, if we are practicing this, we have a heavy responsibility of selecting right patients, because otherwise this technology may get into disrepute amid all this chaos of COVID pneumonia or COVID patients in the hospital. So Dr. Priya from Adyar, I would like to know from you, what is your experience? Did you try any patient? Did you think any time that this is the patient who would need low dose radiation therapy, or rather overall, which patients you will choose for a low dose radiotherapy?
Good evening to all, and I thank Dr. Purvish for having me here in this panel. Actually, at Adyar, we never thought about low dose radiotherapy because, again, as Dr. Sarvani ma'am said, because of the logistic issues, and we initially wanted, our technicians and technologists to come to work, and we didn't want that, any COVID positivity among them would really lower the morale very much. So then treating cancer patients itself was a very big priority for us. And during this COVID time, we never stopped any of our cancer treatments, because all the peripheral government hospitals in Chennai took up the task of converting themselves into COVID centers. So ours was the only center which was catering to the cancer patients. So we never got a real chance to try low dose radiation in our set of patients. But we never saw any patients who became very sick, who were with cancer, and all of them recovered fairly well. And I would say I have not seen any mortality among our cancer patients who presented who were COVID positive.
So I think, what you are saying, because we have not popularized low dose radiotherapy, so we won't get many consults for consideration of low dose radiotherapy. I'm sure in your hospital, there may be many, huge number of patients who would have needed it, but because the physicians, pulmonary medicine people, they don't know, they are not very much aware that low dose radiation is also a treatment, so they didn't pressurize you, and therefore we got away with it. But what about second wave? Now, after a little bit of now awareness, and in the second wave, do you think, did you get any call or spread or awareness increased? Because I fear as the awareness would increase, we will get calls from our medical colleagues.
Sir, so far, nobody has called for this low dose radiation therapy because, as I told you, for us giving radiation to all the heavy load of patients who are coming for treatment itself is a big demand. But the only thing is we don't delay the radiation for cancer patients. So probably that is keeping our medical oncology colleagues going because they did not see any very sick patient who may require it. But yes, as the second wave is progressing and we see more and more sicker patients, and since our hospital is converted into a COVID center now and we are catering to COVID patients also, slowly probably the awareness will come and people may start asking for low dose radiation.
Yeah, so now I would ask Dr. Arpana from Indore. Arpana, tell me whether this low dose radiotherapy is going to stay, or was it a scientific fiction generated by Vinita Goyal et al. And it will just die its own death, or will it be in clinical practice? Arpana.
It will going to stay, like it may become dormant after the second wave, like it has become dormant for many decades. We used to treat pneumonia, then suddenly we came to know, yes, it is a modality. So I think as a radiation oncologist, it's our responsibility to spread the awareness. And now we have measures also, what safety precautions to take and what kinds of patient we have to take. And once this second wave is over, it will not be utilized, but it will remain. And it will teach us a lesson, and it will remain as a guide for any future thing. It is a modality to be judiciously used, not to be feared of.
So now if there is a patient of mine or somebody known to me in Indore and I refer to you for low dose radiotherapy, a corona patient, will you treat? You are ready?
If,
you are willing?
Yeah, we take approval from our ethics committee since we get the reference, and we take a proper informed consent, and we can schedule the patient as a last patient of the day.
Okay. So now, so this is all about acute COVID infection, cytokine storm, patient deteriorating, developing pneumonia, the oxygen requirement is increasing, steroids not giving optimum response, all drugs including remdesivir, etc., have been put out of window by WHO. So now, so what happens now? So other category, so I will ask Dr. Patel now, what about in Ahmedabad? Is anybody, trying, or your hospital is thinking about it? What is your view?
So sorry, I think I would be the odd one person out who would be saying, who will be not very much pro for this, because I think till we don't have even at least a good, like maybe a small number, maybe 10 or 20 patients randomized, where we have in one arm all the basic drugs and medicines going on, and in the other arm these same medicines and radiation, and then a really positivity seen that yes, this radiation really works. Till that time, I would be really not very keen or very happy or confident to start LDRT for my patients, because there are a lot of answers, there are a lot of questions which are not answered. Like when we are giving radiation along with the basic drugs, is it the drugs which is giving the action, or is it the LDRT? We are not aware. Lung radiation, when given, when the normal lung gets the radiation, maybe sometime later we will see some inflammatory response in that normal lung also, which is damaged with radiation. Of course, the late effects of cancer, it is also again a question. So I think till now the evidence is not that very strong. Till I get some very good data from a randomized study that radiation is really helpful, I would not be very keen. So is also in my state, we have not yet started any patients for LDRT, and neither we have seen any positivity for starting even after what has been seen by the AIMS or the South study.
Okay, so now I think because of possible time, we have to switch gears, and there's now another set of patients which we are getting in our clinics, and that is patients who suffered COVID and who had COVID pneumonia, and the pneumonia is not resolving. And sorry, I couldn't put this slide. And there are 2-3 studies. One from the European body, I think the study from Italy, which says that up to 50% of the patients can have persistent pneumonia changes up to 3 to 6 months after COVID infection. And in some study, they say the COVID pneumonia manifestations in the lung can persist up to 1 year. So what happens then? Patient is coming to you as oncologist. Patient has, for example, lung cancer and has got underlying COVID pneumonia, which is persisting. Vinita, can you show the slide if you are technically done it?
No, sir.
No?
I don't have any more slides, sir.
No, I sent you on the mail.
Oh, is it? I did not realize. I'll just download it.
Okay, so by the time you do it, so now this entity is that patient has persistent COVID pneumonia, and when you do a scan, so recently we saw a patient who was a lung cancer patient on the right side, and he had a solitary brain metastasis. Sorry, I have all these slides, but there was some miscommunication, and I left my slides, and I'm not able to present. And so this patient had a solitary brain lesion, and SRS was done. The moment we were considering for radiation for the lung lesion, when we did the CT scan, we found that in addition to the lung lesion, there was bilateral COVID pneumonia manifestations. And patient was mildly symptomatic. He had very mild cough, no fever, and no acute manifestation, but he had persistent COVID pneumonia lesion. Now the question arises, in the presence of COVID pneumonia and in the presence of hemoptysis, where you have to give maybe a single fraction radiation to control the hemoptysis, will you treat this patient with radiation? Maybe Dr. Priya?
Yes, sir, I would like to treat with radiation because symptomatic relief is very important. And since the patient needs it, so I don't think there should be any concern if he is asymptomatic for the COVID infection. So yes, I would definitely go ahead and treat.
So what is, do you have any fear that even if by giving a single dose, there can be a scattered dose to rest of the lung and pneumonia can worsen? Whether, is that a fear in your mind or is not there?
So the fear is there, sir, but when I see the patient is, having hemoptysis and is really in pain because of the cancer and nothing else is working for him, then probably I would take the chance with an informed consent, of course, that he understands it.
Any other, so Dr. Pooja, would you treat this patient? Persistent COVID pneumonia and a lung cancer.
Sir, I think I'll be interested to treat the lung cancer, and by default, the COVID will be a bonus for him.
How you say that there will be a bonus?
Because as such, we are going to treat for the hemoptysis, right? So we'll be treating the lung.
Yes.
So in any case, when we'll be treating
COVID pneumonia is bilateral. How did this bonus will go?
Oh yeah. No, I'm sorry. Then I think probably I would be just treating the lung for the hemoptysis, not this one.
And you are not worried that his COVID pneumonia can worsen?
No, I think that at that time the cancer would be a priority than the COVID because
Dr.
of the
Sarvani?
hemoptysis complaint.
I think I would be concerned about the COVID, the rest of the changes in the lung, but at the same time, treating this cancer would also be a priority. And what I may do is actually explain to the patient the consequences, counsel him and treat him. Because I know that the scatter or the low dose may be a problem in fibrosis that is already there in the lungs. But at the same time, I would think of doing radiotherapy also. I wouldn't leave the cancer untreated.
Dr. Vinita, you got the slides?
No, sir.
No. So sorry. So it was a very interesting slides. So we had a similar patient, and as I said, right-sided lung tumor and bilateral COVID pneumonia. So the fear was, as everybody has fear, I also had a fear that we give radiation to the primary lesion and a scattered dose may not worsen his COVID pneumonia. And if COVID pneumonia worsens, then the blame comes very quickly to the treating oncologist. So we had a similar meeting and with the family and amongst ourselves also. And then there were 2-3 papers which we went through, and we at that time we took out those papers about low dose radiation helping the COVID pneumonia. So this patient we treated with RapidARC because we thought that we will try to target those envelope very tightly around the tumor and reduce scatter dose all around or reduce the dose to rest of the lung. And this patient, we gave single fraction 8 grade to the right-sided lung tumor in the presence of pneumonia. So the patient got benefited. On third day, the hemoptysis settled and he was also very much better and he was discharged. And then I was, in my mind, there was a lot of fear, what will happen to his pneumonia? So we did a HRCT after 1 week. So all those pictures are there, but I'm really sorry, I'm not able to show you here. And so to our surprise, what we saw was that the COVID pneumonia lesions had completely disappeared, along with the response in the hemoptysis. So hemoptysis stopped and the COVID pneumonia lesions disappeared. And one of my doctor colleague, Dr. Priyanka, she rang me up at night. Dr. Saab, the HRCT says there is no COVID pneumonia lesions now. We showed it to radiology. They also said it is resolved. So then we kind of went back to our planning system and saw, since we treated him with BMAT technique, a low dose splash, low dose scatter dose of about 0.3 to 1 gray had gone around in both the lungs. So if you can see with those slides, it is showing that both the lungs received anything about 0.3 to 1 gray in both the lungs. And probably that is the reason that COVID pneumonia lesions regressed. And we have followed this patient. We did another scan at 3 weeks. We did another scan. He was coming for chemotherapy now. So we did another scan at 6 weeks. And now we have done another scan at 3 months. The COVID pneumonia lesions have all disappeared. There were small cavitations, raciness, fibrotic bands. Everything has disappeared. So this is a bonus which somebody was talking that you would get a bonus. I think Dr. Pooja was saying. So this is the bonus we got to our complete utter surprise. And this presentation, this case report has been accepted in British Journal of Radiology, and it will soon be coming in about 2-3 weeks time. So this is another form of low dose radiotherapy, which went inadvertently, but we can do it with good planning. And if patient has COVID pneumonia and lung tumor, we can do it. So now, any other, so I would just like to ask maybe Dr. Sarbani, how many % of patients can have persistent COVID pneumonia in the follow-up? Patients suffered and they are recovering. How many % can have a persistent COVID pneumonia?
Almost 30 to 40% would continue to have these fibrotic things. And that's why, if I'm not wrong, people have empirically started using anti-fibrotic agents, though there is no evidence to support its use, for at least 6 months to prevent this ongoing fibrosis that occurs in the lungs. Yeah. So it is known, and it is something that everybody is now getting scared of. Yeah. So people
Yeah, so I was talking to our radiologist how to differentiate fibrosis from late COVID pneumonia inflammatory lesions where there are microemboli, microthrombi, inflammation, lingering inflammation. So I think they are also looking at it how to kind of differentiate fibrosis from inflammation in a patient who has got persisting COVID pneumonia. So I think we have overshot our time. Any other comment from any panelists, a burning thought about low dose radiotherapy? Dr. Vinita, you want to say anything?
So do you think that this low dose radiation therapy is going to last? This is going to be one of the treatment for a long time? I don't think. I think we will soon find some effective antiviral therapy or anti-inflammatory therapy. I mean,
so in 1.5 years, we haven't found.
With LDRT 1900s was fine, not now.
So now I agree, but the point is in 1.5 years, we haven't found any effective therapy. Whatever effective therapy like ivermectin, favipiravir, other things, they all, WHO has kind of withdrawn. So instead of finding more drugs, we are losing drugs. Whatever drugs were coming in the market today, they say there's no solid evidence to use any drug. So right now it is a little bit of scary situation, and we hope and pray to God the third wave should not come. Second wave was very deadly, and we are seeing so many patients dying of thrombi and persisting pneumonia. I think we will see now more persisting pneumonia in this wave. Mucormycosis we are already seeing. I don't know when when radiation oncologists will contribute to what, but hope and pray is that we should not have third wave, and we should not be called upon for doing this kind of difficult job. So I thank all the panelists for their valuable contribution to this seminar. And this is a burning topic which everybody knows. If a very near and dear one comes to you with this situation, I think your conscience will prick to give radiation maybe and save him. Thank you very much, Dr. Purvesh Parikh, for this opportunity, and I hand you back the mic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anil Anand. Over to Amish for the final conclusion.
Thank you, sir. I think one thing which always amazes me and I learn from Dr. A.K. Anand, sir, is always be enthusiastic and be positive and believe in your cause. And it's always an honor to listen to him. I thank you, sir. You are right. We should always be open to various thoughts and ideas. Who knows? Like we are slowly learning that little dose of radiation before immunotherapy probably is much better than just immunotherapy alone. Similarly, low dose radiotherapy may be one of the treatment options of COVID in future. It is just that as Dr. Tarini Sahu was talking in the chat box and Dr. Pooja said, I think some randomized control trial sort of data would make us more wiser how to use it, when to use it. But sir, thank you. And I thank all the panelists for being there. Dr. Somashekhar alluded to surgery before and after COVID, how it was very nice learning experience. I thank both the moderators for being on time and bringing out very important and remarks in a brisk way so that we could take home all the messages what we were looking for. I thank all the panelists for taking active part in that. Day after tomorrow, that is on 10th of June, we have this very interesting topic of COVID vaccination for cancer patients. When, what, why, and why not? We had one session of COVID vaccination early on during the COVID pandemic. We have learned a lot in last 2-3 months also. What does antibodies do? How protective they are? Do cancer patients develop less antibodies? And there are many such burning questions which will be covered by Dr. Senthil Rajappa, who is going to be the moderator for this session. And we all, Dr. Parikh sir, myself and Dr. Tarini, invite all of you again on 10th of June to attend this session and participate. Thank you very much. And I think, Kashish, we can conclude the session here.